Good evening and welcome to the August meeting of the Eastchester Board of Fire Commissioners. We started the meeting tonight at 6 p.m., immediately went into executive session, and now we're starting the public session. The time is 7:26 p.m. Before we begin tonight's meeting with our treasurer's report, I'd like to mention that the board held a special meeting last night to interview candidates for 2 vacant probationary firefighter positions. I'll discuss the interviews a little bit later this evening, but I just want to let you know that in order to cut down on the agenda tonight, last night the board voted to pay the bills, which totaled $322,627.13, and to approve the minutes for our June 10th and July 12th meetings. So now I'd like to introduce our treasurer, Jamie Hedstrom, to give her report.
Okay, so tonight we're looking at the budget through July 31st. The financials currently present a net budget surplus of approximately $220,000. This is a decrease from last month. That's predominantly due to a third payroll that was processed in July but paid in August. Other than that, we are predominantly trending as budgeted and as expected, with the exception of the overtime, which we've been discussing at length at the last couple of meetings. With respect to the overtime, just as a kind of a recap, we did do a transfer in May that we were anticipating would get us through the remainder of the year. But then in June or July, we did have a number of long-term injuries that, as we had said when we made the transfer originally, had not been accounted for because they really couldn't be anticipated. I had mentioned we anticipated those long-term injuries would cost us about an additional $155,000 in overtime. But to date, we have not made any additional transfers related to that. So I believe tonight we're looking to just make a smaller transfer than the $155,000, just something to basically get us through until the next meeting, so that we can keep running as we have been while we do additional detailed analysis on the impact of some of those injuries and if there's any other alternatives.
Okay. The answer is I'm comfortable making a transfer in the context of $50,000 to get us through to the next meeting. The treasurer is actually working on putting together some information for the board, some more detailed analysis to help us figure out exactly the best way to proceed, and we'll discuss it again in September, and at that point we could decide if we want to, fund the overtime budget any further, or if we're just going to hold the line there. So I would propose that we make that transfer. I would actually, before we get to that, I would add, the numbers continue to be very high. Our non-line of duty sick rate hours are just under 7% from January through July 31st. Overall, our sick rate percentage is around 7.83%. Again, I believe those numbers are well above what's experienced by departments of similar size. So we're going to do some more analysis on it, and we'll revisit this next month. But in the meantime, I would make a motion to transfer $50,000 from line item 9040.8, Workman's Comp, where we have a surplus, to 3413.1, which is overtime firefighters. So I will make that motion. Do I have anyone who seconds it? Okay, and I will poll the board. Commissioner Rabin? Aye. Commissioner Laurie?
Aye.
I am an aye. Commissioner Roach?
Aye.
And Commissioner Winter?
Aye.
Motion carries.
So the next thing really is just focusing on putting together the budget for 2019, which will be the main focus, I think, of the next couple of months' meetings. We did receive guidance from New York State that this year the 2% tax cap is actually 2%, thanks to inflation being over 2%. It's the first time since 2013. So between that and the fact that since we didn't raise taxes last year, we get a carryover of what we didn't use last year. So this year we have the ability to increase taxes just over 4% with staying under the tax cap. So that's our number when you take into consideration the 2% plus the carryover we have from last year. So that nets to about $700,000. I'm not saying that is what we're going to increase it. I'm just saying that is what we have available to us without having to make a motion to exceed, or a resolution to exceed the tax cap. So certain costs we know that we can't control. I believe I just received I saw it in my email today, the pension system estimate is out. Our healthcare is anticipating the same 10% increase as last year. So certain things like that will have to be factored in. Otherwise, I think that this year, as you know, last year, we really did sort of trim the fat in the budget. And so I think a lot of the accounts are budgeted correctly in terms of where we're spending. So I think where I'm going to need some input from the chief and from the board is for any of these additional special projects we're talking about, or anywhere where we're replacing something major or renovating something major, we need to have some discussion about thought process for what's a need, what's a want, and where we want some of that to come from. So that's what I think we need to be working on in the next month or so.
Okay.
Other than that, just a few small things. Our PERMA audit is commencing, so we have to send them the records by October. It's basically, they do it every year. It's just a true up of, because our premiums are based on salaries, so they just come in and audit that the salaries are what we said they were. I did receive the file again from the town of the small claim assessment review cases. So these are basically like the tax grievances of individuals. Unlike when we get a cert, which could be for a period of 10 years, these are just for a 1-year period. So I did just receive those last week. There's 75 in total. Last year, it came in about $12,000. It's just a lot of administrative work, but it's not typically a ton of money. So you will have that for next month's meeting. And then I was just going to mention that we did get an invite from PERMA, who is our workers' comp carrier. They're doing a regional seminar in New Rochelle dealing with all of the new sexual harassment laws, if that's something that anyone is interested in. It's free. It's, geared towards, it says like board members and trustees and.
What date is that going to be, Jamie?
It's September 21st in New Rochelle.
Yeah, I won't make that one.
So it's just going through how the law changes are going to impact and, suggestions for policies and
I'm not going
procedures.
to be here either. Country.
And that's it.
Okay. Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you, Jamie.
I think next we'll have the chief give his monthly report.
Thank you, Commissioner. The monthly activity report for July 2018, total alarms was 343. 5 were fire-related, 178 were EMS or rescue-related, and mutual aid was given once to Mount Vernon and once to Pelham Fire Department. Last evening, we had a fire in Bronxville. The members of Group 3, led by Captain Calby, had an apartment fire right up the street at the Midland Gardens complex in Bronxville. Their aggressive initial attack contained the fire damage to a 1-bedroom. There was extremely heavy smoke condition in the public hallway, creating difficulty for residents to self-evacuate. The home health care worker that was in the apartment where the fire was started was able to drag the elderly resident from the apartment out into the hallway where 2 members of the Bronxville police, Police Officer Paul Cavallo and Police Officer Laura Lee Erwich, were able to carry her down to the ground floor to safety. She was unable to self-evacuate because she was handicapped and she would not have been able to get out of the apartment otherwise. So I think they saved that elderly woman's life. Maybe the next time we do a award ceremony, we could recognize them.
Chief, can you send their chief a letter in the interim?
Yeah, I was going to do that to the mutual aid companies and also to the police department. Thank you to the mutual aid companies from New Rochelle Fire Department and Mount Vernon Fire Department for their mutual aid assistance. While they were here on mutual aid, we had a report of a kitchen fire on Parkway Road. It turned out to be a pizza box left in an oven, which caught on fire, but it created a large smoke condition, so they had to do some ventilation, so they were there an extended period of time. That's when we had Mount Vernon come in to backfill at headquarters. And also thank you to EVAC for responding, as they always do on our fires, and stand by for us and evaluate everybody. We had a cause and origin member from the Westchester County team, Mr. Benson, and Mount Vernon Fire Captain Adindo also came in to do the cause and origin. What they determined was that it was an air conditioner plugged into a power strip or a surge protector. And I must stress to the residents, this is the second month in a row that we've had that start a fire. In June, we had one in Tuckahoe in a private residence, an air conditioner plugged into a power strip. They're not made for appliances. They're not heavy duty enough. The amperage that's going through there cannot be handled. So I would recommend the air conditioners and appliances are plugged directly into an outlet. Do not use the power strips. It's not going to protect it from a surge. It's going to overheat and possibly start a fire. So I would stress that to the members of the public. As we mentioned, the overtime, July continued. 4 members are out on long-term absences. 1 member did come back who was on a long-term absence and returned to work. And the 3 probationary firefighters have begun their assignments in their groups, so that also is assisting with the overtime. Vehicle maintenance continues through the use of outside vendors. In July, Car 2102 and Engine 27 were involved in an accident. Car 2102 is still out of service. It has been completely repaired from the accident, but there's an issue with the rear door handle. Ruscon is attempting to get the part to replace it. They're unable to open the rear door without a screwdriver, so it's not practical in an emergency situation. So hopefully we'll get that car back in service shortly. Engine 27 was repaired, and Car 2102 went out to the body shop, and they put a new bumper and fender on and painted it, so that's ready to go. Mechanic Tim Dalton, maintenance mechanic Tim Dalton's been working on numerous repair projects and doing a lot of painting around the firehouses. And Station 4 project has started in earnest with the masons are working there now, the window people are there, and the painters are there, and the scaffolding has been erected. So that has really started to begin. Fire prevention is continuing with Captain Pinaval and Firefighter Vitarello, as usual. And Commissioner Laurie and I met with Mr. Weir of Bronxville. I believe he's going to speak in a short while regarding the retaining wall. And so he proposed possibly having a survey done with shared costs between his church and also the fire department to determine the ownership of the wall and then have it go from there. So I'll let him address it during the public, when the public addresses the board. All right, that's it.
Okay, thanks, Chief, and thanks and appreciation to Captain Calby and his team yesterday for a fine job at Bitland Gardens. So, next up, a discussion of absentee ballots in the December fire election. Last month, the board discussed the idea of allowing absentee ballots in the upcoming election. We have each had a chance now to review the law on the subject, and I'll open it up for discussion, although this discussion may continue into next month. One of the things that we learned is that we have 60 days prior to the election to elect to do this. There are a number of rules and regulations involved in this. One thing that I do want to get information on, in order for a disabled person to submit an absentee ballot, they have to be designated, identified as permanently disabled. The Board of Elections keeps track of this, so they'll let us know exactly how many people in the district this would be. My thoughts, about this after, what I've read is that I have no objection to it, but it's going to be a lot of work to create, collect, and then verify the ballots. And I just want to be sure that we know that it's going to be a meaningful enough number of people who take advantage of it to make it worth the effort. And, it's something that, we can look historically at how the elections have turned out and what kind of votes may swing it and what we think the ballot usage will be. But we're trying to get that information from the Board of Election. And I guess personally, I would reserve judgment on it till next month when we get it. Does anybody else have any thoughts on that?
It was in this morning's Journal News on the front page, how to obtain an absentee ballot, and it was on the front page. So if anybody wants to know about it, just look at today's Journal News.
Yeah,
And I don't have no problem with that, because I know to obtain that, you just don't raise your hand like we heard last month, and they hand them out to you. That's not so. Wherever you heard that, you have to apply through the Board of Elections. You just don't go to no community center or senior citizens and you raise your hand and they give it to you. That's not so. So, like I says, if anyone wants to see today's Journal News, it explains the whole detail, how to receive it and where to receive it.
Mr. Laurie, I think you're referring to as a general election or election run by the...
No, I'm not. I'm referring
let
to
me talk.
absentee ballot. You'll have plenty of time to talk.
If you look at a school district or a fire district, they run their own elections. So if you wanted to use an absentee ballot, let's say in the Bronxville Village school board election or budget hearing, whatever you want to call it, a budget vote, you would simply stop by the Bronxville school, you would request an absentee ballot, they would hand you a form, you would sign your name, they hand you the ballot. At that point in time, you check the box, you fold it up, you put it in an envelope, you hand it back to the secretary, and you filed your absentee ballot. I know because in May, when they had a budget vote and a school board vote, I was going to be traveling that month, and I personally went over to the Bronxville School and filed an absentee ballot, and I did it in about 5 minutes, and they have full-time staff to do that. If I was voting at a county election, I would contact Westchester County Board of Elections, and the procedure is similar to what you're probably describing in the newspaper. In a fire district election, you would go to the front of the secretary's office, ask for an absentee ballot similar to the school district, and they would give you the ballot, and you process it, but it needs somebody to be in the front office, which we don't staff full-time. I don't think we used absentee ballots here. The last time is probably '05 maybe, is the last time we used absentee ballots. And if I go back and look at the history prior to '05, for, call it 5 or 7 years, I think there hasn't been an election changed by absentee ballots. The highest vote count that I can know of in the Eastchester Fire District was probably George Mayer versus Peter Iodize, which roughly 3,000 people voted, and there were probably 150 absentee ballots, and it wouldn't have changed the result. So I haven't seen an absentee ballot number change the election. One of the big problems with our election is nobody votes. I mean, when I say nobody votes, we get roughly 4% of the population, 3% of the population voting, if that. We might get 3% on a big election, people voting. That's the numbers.
So what Mr. Winters is saying, that he does not want absentee ballot. It doesn't matter one vote, whether it changes or not. You cannot deprive the person of an absentee ballot. So where Mr. Winters is just telling you, it doesn't matter if you have an absentee ballot or not, because one vote is not going to change the election. We know that. We're not stupid. But we cannot deny a person an absentee ballot because they're sick, they're going to be out of the country, or whatever have you, or out of the county, I should say also. That doesn't mean that's going to change the election. Why was it stopped? I don't know. Ask Mr. Winters why it was stopped. Maybe he could tell you, but I don't know why it was stopped. And I think it's a good idea, whether it's one person that wants an absentee ballot or 20 people want an absentee ballot. There's nothing wrong with it. I'm not saying that all the people that are using absentee ballots to change the election results. That doesn't matter who wins or who loses. It's just that the person has their right to vote, and that's it.
The only thing I would say is I agree, and everyone should have the right to vote. But like I said, I went through the process, the law on this, and it will be a lot of work. It'll be a lot of work to create, collect, and then verify the ballots when they come in, especially if it's contested, because you're going to start to get into whether or not this person is truly identified as disabled, whether or not this person was in Costa Rica and not actually in Bronxville at the time. It could become very time-consuming, and I just want to be careful, even though I agree with you completely, Anthony, that it's important that people have a right to vote. But if it's going to consume many, many hours of someone's time for what may likely be 10 to 15 votes in total, we need to consider whether or not it's worth the effort. So, and I want, personally, I'm going to reserve judgment on that until I get those numbers that I mentioned I was going to seek from the Board of Election.
If you look at the fact that New York State law leaves it up to the fire district, they have never repealed Section 170, I think it's 175, right? They have never repealed that in New York State. So New York State, by having that provision in the law, is saying to a local fire district, you decide whether you want absentee ballots or not. If the state thought it was critical to have absentee ballots, they would simply require us to. Now, you may say federal law requires you to have an absentee ballot, and that might be correct. But New York State section of law that is directing us on this is giving the option to the fire district for whatever reason they are. And so I think we're just discussing the option that the law is giving you. They're not saying you must, they're saying you may, which is an important distinction.
Who stopped it here?
Who stopped it here?
Yeah.
You'd have to go back and look at the records back when...
You just says 2005, you haven't had it, so you must have looked at the records back then.
Well, I think you had them in 2005. I think you had absentee ballots in 2000. I don't know, you'd have to look. I know
Okay.
I have every election going back to 98
Let's,
listed, so I know.
so here, just, we'll move on from this, we'll revisit it next month, and then we'll make a decision. Like I said, we have to do this 60 days before the election, so we do have a little bit of time here to give this further consideration. Next up, a discussion of our Chester Heights renovation. Phase 2 of the project is underway. As a reminder, we're restoring the exterior of the building at this point from the roof line down. The roof was replaced in 2017. We got a late start because the building permits were held up with some incomplete information from the contractor, but that's been resolved, and now these guys are going full bore. So hopefully, the estimated completion time was 4 months. We're hoping it comes in a little bit under that. Given they started a couple of weeks ago, we still have 3 months to go on this part of the project. The board recently received a proposal for architectural and engineering services from FSI, who's the architect who's handling the work right now that's being done. That phase, that proposal is for work on the interior of the building. That work will almost certainly be the most costly and the most complex. The floor needs replacement. The kitchens and bathrooms all need replacement. Basically, all the interior finishes need to be redone. It needs a new heating system, HVAC. We're talking about putting audio-visual in so we could hold our meetings in the upper room, and also significantly making the building handicap accessible. So that would include putting an elevator in. It's a project that's going to come with a big price tag, and it's a perfect topic for us to hold one of our first work sessions. So the board is going to schedule a work session just to go over the work that's going to be done there, the proposal from FSI. We're hopeful that that's going to take place in between this meeting and our regularly scheduled meeting in September. Certainly, we'll send out notices when we're ready to do it, but that's something that'll be coming up.
I would hope it would be, to me, it should be a televised regular meeting. There's no difference between a work session and a board meeting. Under New York State open meeting law, there is no such thing as a working session for a school district or, I mean, municipalities do it, but open meeting law, they're meetings.
And school districts do it.
And school districts do it.
Yeah. And the
but-
Village of Bronxville does them.
Yeah, but they should be public meetings. The public's allowed to come
public.
in,
They're allowed.
and they should be televised, and, you know, the public should just, we don't have that many meetings, but we can't televise it and watch what goes on,
The public will be invited though, so that's,
but no camera.
You know,
We've had plenty of
here's
meetings
the
at
thing,
the
you know,
firehouse.
a work session to me typically occurs a little bit differently. You're sitting at a circular table and you've got documents in front of you, you're reviewing, you're pulling paper. You know, I don't know if we're set up to kind of handle that, and I don't really see, as long as we give the public a summary of what's taken place at our September meeting, I don't think it's necessary to televise it. Those are my thoughts, but I guess if enough people on the board want to do that, we will.
Absolutely. There's no reason why we couldn't televise it. It's within our right to do it. I think some school districts, I believe Tuckahoe School District actually televises some of their budget workshops, so.
Yeah, it may be, I mean, maybe boring television, but
I have absolutely no
But-
reservation doing so.
Okay?
oh, on elections, just on a note, the Village of Bronxville notified me today that the Westchester County Board of Elections has designated the Bronxville Firehouse as a polling place for the primaries, I think. First I'm hearing of it. Chief, do you hear anything of it?
It may have been an inquiry. I don't think they've designated it.
Well, the building's not accessible, it doesn't have accessible bathrooms, it doesn't have, you know, rails.
Reach out to us.
So we got to reach out to the county and tell them it's probably not appropriate.
Have they notified this board yet on it?
No, I just got an email from the village administrator saying he got a notice saying they were using that building, and he wanted to know if we knew. So I'm telling you about it.
Okay, thank you. Next up, going to be a discussion of litigation and some other legal matters. I am going to read from some prepared text for some of this, just because some of what's going on here is somewhat detailed, and I want to make sure I cover it all. So we were facing several lawsuits. A couple of them we're going to settle. I'll go through that first. First lawsuit, the district and several commissioners individually were sued by a former employee, Nicholas D. Costanza, for reimbursement of Medicare Part B payments. After a thorough analysis of his claims, the board has decided to settle the lawsuit. The district will pay $27,000 approximately for reimbursement of past payments, as well as cover the payments going forward. Okay, the hydrant case. This
Can we have a
was,
discussion on that at all?
you want to wait until I'm
Okay, fine, go to hydrant case.
Okay. The next case is the hydrant case. In 2016, the town of Eastchester sued the Eastchester Fire District for reimbursement of costs to maintain fire hydrants within the town. A little background of how we got here. Historically, the water companies would bill the two villages, Bronxville and Tuckahoe, and the town proper for maintenance of fire hydrants across the town. These entities would then submit these bills to the fire district for reimbursement. While there was never any formal agreement to do so, the district did, in fact, provide those reimbursements for many years. At some point around 2012, the water company gave these governments the option to continue to receive the bill for maintenance or have each water user within their boundaries be billed directly. By 2015, both Bronxville and Tuckahoe chose to have customers billed their pro rata share directly, and Eastchester proper opted to continue to receive the bills and submit them to the district. At this point, the district realized we had a problem. As an autonomous unit of government, we fund the department by taxing the town as a whole at a singular rate. We have no mechanism to tax Bronxville, Tuckahoe, and Eastchester proper at different rates. Given that fact, if we paid Eastchester proper water bill, the residents of Bronxville and Tuckahoe would in fact pay for hydrant maintenance twice. Once directly to the water company, and again, if we paid Eastchester proper water bill, the residents of Bronxville, Tuckahoe would pay twice for hydrant maintenance, once directly to the water company, and again, if the district reimbursed Eastchester proper with tax dollars collected from all three. Sorry about that. No one anticipated this conundrum, but it existed. So the only option that seemed fair to the board was to stop paying Eastchester's bill. Ultimately, that move resulted in the town suing the district. This suit has always troubled me and several of us on the board, and it would trouble everyone in the town that was aware of it. Unfortunately, not enough people were. We had two government entities with the same tax base suing each other. So
Well,
what?
not suing each other, being sued by the
Okay.
town
Yes,
board.
being sued, and, yes, being sued. So what this meant was that town residents would lose no matter who won, because both sides would be incurring legal costs that would be paid by the town taxpayers. I do not believe that the town or the Eastchester Fire District understood the predicament we would be in once part of our tax base switched to how hydrant bills were being paid while another part did not. Further, the board believes it is reasonable to cover those costs for some short transitionary period. Once Eastchester proper became aware of the issue, they were on notice that and could have moved to take the same action as Bronxville and Tuckahoe, meaning have the water company bill residents directly. For these reasons, we believe covering the cost for a transitionary period is fair. $160,000 represents approximately 1.2 years of hydrant bills for the town, and the board has agreed to a settlement to provide that reimbursement, but have no further obligation to reimburse the town for hydrant maintenance. So, those are those cases, if anyone wants to comment on that
That was a
further.
very good synopsis of the hydrant case. The hydrant case, if anybody thinks about things from an equitable point of view of your tax dollars, for the town board to have brought that case to me was so egregious. And by the end of this case, I mean, they were up to about $500,000 is what the town was arguing what they were entitled to. And we basically came around to a one-year settlement. I believe we would have won this case had it gone through the courts because there was no contract, there was no bona fide contract. It was a verbal agreement from, 100 years ago or something. So I just think it was irresponsible of the town. The town has spent, I don't know, $100,000 or something bringing this action against the fire district, and we've spent tens of thousands of dollars defending it. So from a taxpayer's point of view, I'm glad it's going to bed. From an equitable point of view, I wouldn't have settled it. I would have let it go through the courts, and the legal result would have been the legal result, and I think we would have prevailed 100%. But the cost of settling is not that extreme for the fire district because it's, as Peter said, 1.2 years and it's behind us, of fees. So this, to me, was all the town board members should be ashamed of themselves, except for Glenn Bolito, who did not vote to bring that lawsuit. He wasn't at that meeting where they voted to bring the lawsuit, but they should be ashamed of themselves for bringing it, and town supervisors should be ashamed. It was a disgrace, and I'm glad it's behind us. The Nick Costanza lawsuit, there is another, he named board members personally. It's another lawsuit I would have not settled. I signed the agreement to settle it because if the majority of the board settles the agreement, I'm out there by myself with public officers immunity and there's no counterclaim. Mr. Costanza worked for the fire district between he worked for 16 years, retired, and somewhere around 1998, right around the same time New York State came in to audit our hours for people who were being reported into the retirement system. He was one of the people that were subject to that audit. He's been getting free health care since the time he started working for the district in 1984 or something. So he worked for us for 16 years, and he was reported to the retirement system as a full-time employee during those years. I don't know if he was a full-time employee. I can never prove he was not a full-time employee. I suspect he was not a full-time employee. But in any case, he was reported to the retirement system as a full-time employee. He got health care for those years. He was our employee. He got health care after he left the fire district. He gets health care today, and he sued us over his Medicaid Part B payments, which is roughly, $3,000 a year. And that's what he's suing for. You get Part B payments from after your age of 65. So, and you only get since we have NYSHIP for insurance, the state insurance fund for firefighters, which the plan he's in, we reimburse all firefighters at Medicaid Part B. I guess at some point in time he realized he's in the same plan and wants Medicaid Part B, and that was the genesis of the lawsuit. He sued us. We counterclaimed suing him, alleging maybe he wasn't a full-time employee and he wasn't entitled to this. The board has chosen to settle this. I will not vote to settle that lawsuit. I had to sign the agreement because if the rest of the board agrees to it, I'm out there by myself and I have public officers immunity. It doesn't, the counterclaim goes away. We've basically sued for fraud and that counterclaim goes away. So I wish the board would have followed that through to the appellate division. I think it's a disgrace.
I personally worked with Mr. DeCostanza on many different occasions while he worked for this board. I worked on one of the recounting when the election was pretty close, and my book, Mr. DeCostanza is an honorable man and a very well-respected man in my book and a total gentleman.
I'll opine. You know, I wasn't a member of the board, and unfortunately, I didn't follow what was going on close enough to know definitively if what Dennis claims is true. But what I can tell you is that I spent a lot of time looking at this, and I do not believe that we were going to prove our case. I think we were going to lose, and that's why I voted to settle it. And I think that the board, after hearing, you know, what we were facing, and after the recommendation of council, voted to do so. So that's what I feel about that case. As far as the town case, again, I'll reiterate, a win is a loss. If the fire district won that case, you, the taxpayers, are still paying, so that is a loss. And, you know, I don't agree with Dennis. I do think that egos got in the way with certainly a board member on this board, maybe two, and perhaps a couple of people at the town. But I also believe that the town probably was, you know, willing to look to forge a settlement with us earlier on in this case, so that neither side would have rung up the legal bills that we did. And it's regrettable that happened, and it's a shame. And but I think I hate to say the term because but there's blame on both sides on that issue, and that's, you know.
That's her opinion.
All right, you're right. That is my opinion.
And I'll also say something. It has very little to do with the lawsuit. What I have, my complaint is that just the way the whole thing is structured, the Safety Commission, the Safety Public Commission allows the utility, right, allows the utility to charge us a fee to maintain hydrants, and yet these hydrants aren't being maintained. I think that what should happen is they should only be able to bill, and whether it's the customers or the district, I think it will be the customers going forward, only what they actually spent in maintenance the previous year. I don't think that they should be making a profit off of the you know, what do you call it, the Public Safety Commission. They pass legislation, it's obviously...
We're not even allowed to test fire hydrants. We're not allowed to touch fire hydrants. We can only use fire hydrants at a working fire. We can't use fire hydrants other than a working fire or to fill our rigs. That's it.
What do you want to use them for?
Well, we can't drill,
We want to know they're working.
you can't go up to a fire hydrant and test it. We're not allowed to.
Well, the water department takes care of that.
There you go. That's your answer.
All right,
How
so
many times do we have to call
What are
them
you
to
saying?
get-
You want the fire department to go testing them?
I'm saying it'd be nice if the fire department had the ability to test them.
You got that much more manpower for them to do that? Huh?
Never mind.
Never mind? What did I say wrong that you don't like?
Hydrants are extremely important.
Absolutely.
Priority hydrants, and we have to know that every hydrant in our district is available for use. if it's
Absolutely.
needed.
okay, but Tom, here's the thing. Standpipes are very important too, but our fire department does not go to Stone Lee, which is the building I live in, and test the standpipes. We have an outside company that does it. So, I mean, it's similar with the water company. As long as they're performing the inspections on
you
a
hit it.
regular
As long
basis,
as they're doing
I
it.
think, you know, and we're paying for that service, I don't think that the EFD has to be the one doing that. So I actually agree with Anthony on that, provided that they're doing what they should be
In
doing.
Scarsdale, the water department does it, the fire department doesn't do it. They go around testing it. They grease all the caps and everything. The fire department does not touch that. The water department does it, Tom.
No, we understand that. I'm just saying that what we're paying for should be done. We should have every hydrant.
Nobody's going to dispute that. No, you know, of course. All right, so we're going to read resolutions for those 2 lawsuit settlements, but we also have another resolution, and it has to do with approving the hiring of an investigator. At our meeting last month, I expressed concern that a small number of firefighters may be abusing department policies. The board has decided to investigate instances of suspected abuse, and I will look to pass a resolution this evening to retain an investigator. I'm also going to add that I was pleased by the union's encouragement to investigate instances of abuse and hope that they can assist in eliminating any that may be found. So thank you to 916 for supporting this effort. Without further ado, I am going to read these resolutions and ask for a vote. First, resolved upon the recommendation of the council for the district that the Board of Fire Commissioners hereby agrees to and accepts the settlement in the following matter. Town of Eastchester versus Eastchester Fire District, Westchester County Index Number 51453/2016, as per the proposed settlement and mutual release agreement. Be it further resolved that this resolution shall take effect immediately, and the agreed-upon settlement payment shall be issued upon execution and ratification of said settlement and mutual release agreement by the Town of Eastchester. And it is further resolved that the chairman of the Board of Fire Commissioners, chair or his designee, has the authority to take further actions necessary to effectuate this settlement. So, I will make the motion to pass that resolution. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. I will poll the board. Commissioner Rabin.
Abstain.
Commissioner Laurie.
Aye.
I am an aye. Commissioner Winter.
No.
Commissioner Roach.
Aye.
Motion passes. Next. Resolved upon the recommendation of council for the district that the Board of Fire Commissioners hereby agrees to and accepts the settlement in the following matter. D. Costanzo versus Eastchester Fire District et al., index number 54391/2017, as per the proposed settlement and mutual release agreement. Be it further resolved that this resolution shall take effect immediately, and the agreed-upon settlement payment and compromise shall issue upon execution of said settlement and mutual release agreement by Mr. D. Costanzo. And it is further resolved that the chairman of the Board of Fire Commissioners, chair or his designee, has the authority to take any further actions necessary to effectuate this settlement. I will make the motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I will poll the board. Commissioner Rabin. Commissioner Laurie.
Aye.
Commissioner Inkledon, I am an aye. Commissioner Winter.
No.
And Commissioner Roach.
Well, I'm not sure, not being named in the litigation, am I to vote or am I to abstain?
Absolutely, you're on the board. Yep.
All right, I'll vote to resolve.
Okay, motion carries. Next up, approval of investigator. Resolved upon the recommendation of council for the district that the Board of Fire Commissioners hereby agrees to retain Robert Ponzini Esquire of Gaines Novick Ponzini, Cuso and Venditti LLP, an attorney experienced in municipal law and labor and employment law, to conduct an investigation into employee misconduct. Be it further resolved that upon the conclusion of his investigation, Mr. Ponzini shall report his findings, if any, to the council for the district. Be it further resolved that Mr. Ponzini and members of his firm who assist in this investigation shall be compensated in the same billing basis as is currently approved for council for the district. And it is further resolved that this resolution shall take effect immediately, and all district employees shall cooperate with Mr. Ponzini's investigation as may be required by district policy or as may be provided by law. I will make that motion. Do I have someone who will second it?
Second.
I will poll the board. Commissioner Rabin. Aye. Commissioner Laurie.
Aye.
I am an aye. Commissioner Winter.
Aye.
Commissioner Roach.
I'm going to abstain, I don't have enough information right now.
Motion carries. Okay. Staying on litigation, volunteer lawsuit. At this point, we have received almost all of the information we requested in our FOIL of the VOA and the VBA. The remaining documents include some portion of the 2013 meeting minutes of the VOA. At this point, the court will compel the VOA to produce them, or will accept affidavits from these organizations or from that organization that the information no longer exists and cannot be reasonably reproduced. While this would basically conclude the litigation, once that last step happens, we still need to recoup our legal fees. We did get a judgment today from Judge Blackwood, who was presiding, where we were awarded $39,000 in attorney fees for this case. It is my hope that these volunteer organizations accept that decision and pay the legal fees. It was a lawful FOIL. It should have been responded to, and this will put an end to the litigation, phase of this proceeding. The board is still in the process of reviewing some of the documents, and there may be more to say about that in the future, but that's where the lawsuit stands.
I'd like to discuss some of the documents we've created, we've got. What basically happened, 2 years ago, we foiled the Volunteer Officers Association, which represents the 6 fire companies, and the Benevolent, which is where the 2% money is kept from your tax dollars from foreign insurance company tax, which is basically 2% of your fire insurance tax. We foiled both of these organizations, and they both didn't respond to the FOIL. Then we followed up with a FOIL appeal. They didn't respond. We filed up with an Article 78. They basically didn't respond to the 78. Then we went down the road quite a bit, and then we got a court order. They ignored the court order. We got a second court order. They ignored the second court order. We filed contempt charges. The judge had a contempt hearing. The judge got so frustrated, she actually had 2 hearings. And so now we have all the checks going back about 4 years. The checks are staggering. The Benevolent has, and I'll use the Benevolent and the VOA interchangeably because the money's moved together between the two like it's one organization. They basically, since 2013, have given out $650,000 in death benefits to basically the widows or the widows of deceased members, which is perfectly appropriate for them to do that. The largest check they gave out was $31,537, and then it's followed by a $30,000 check. So the checks range from in the tens or $20,000 for these death benefits for widows of former volunteer members who are exempt members, which is perfectly appropriate, but you're $650,000 over the last 5 years. That's, to me, appropriate. They've given out $70,000 in scholarships to high school students in the last 5 years. That, to me, is not so appropriate, $69,000. The highest scholarship is $5,000. They've given out to the Eastchester fire companies for recruitment and retention, like the North End Hose Company, the Bronxville Hose Company, Union Corners, Tuckahoe Hose Company, Rescue Hook and Ladder, Waverly Engine Company, and they get checks for like $25,000, $14,000, $7,000 to these dormant companies who haven't responded to a fire in over 10 years. They would stop responding to fires 10 years ago. Those volunteer companies have gotten $240,000. We don't know how they spent the money. The board has foiled these volunteer companies, and the volunteers, even though they just went through this whole routine with the two organizations, they're refusing to answer the volunteer company FOILs. They have not delivered us any information on the volunteer company FOILs. They've also distributed about $75,000 a year to the union, which is perfectly appropriate for their 2% money. They give 45% of their money that they receive from New York State. They've told New York State they have $2 million in these baskets. The real number, as we calculate, is over $6 million. By the time we add up all the bank accounts, there's $6 million there. Mr. Laurie, who's my board member here, was given a check for $5,000 that he wrote to himself on November 6, 2014. I don't know what the $5,000 was for. He also has received a total of including $5,000, he has received $18,000 between the benevolent and the VOA. Mostly it's coming from the benevolent. It's labeled monument maintenance, so I think it's for cutting grass. And he's getting those checks including 2018. So this is an ongoing thing that he's receiving checks from the volunteers. They spent about $45,000 to $50,000 trying to defend these lawsuits, the benevolent from trying to hold back the documents. They've wrote checks for cash of almost $4,000. Just go to the bank and take out cash for $4,000. They've given out they've spent about, looks like about $100,000 or more, about $100,000 to restore a couple old pieces of apparatus. In food, just going out to dinner and stuff like that for their meetings, they've spent $61,000, I believe. Yes, I think it was $61,000 for foodstuffs, going to restaurants like Chow's is quite often, Westchester Manor, $65,000 they spent in dinners in the last 5 years. This is an organization that has not been to a fire scene in 10 years. Just to charity, giving money to charity, they gave $18,000 out to charity, to things like the Tuckahoe Police Benevolent Association, Tuckahoe Police Department, Eastchester Lions Club, St. Jude's Hospital, Leroy Gregory Post, Hudson Valley Flights, I can't say this name, it's Giuseppe Garibaldi Lodge, it goes on and on and on to these American Cancer Society. I mean, the charities are worthy charities, but these are tax dollars being given out. And you're talking about $18,000 in the last 5 years going out to charities of volunteer money. So all in all, of the money that's being spent by the volunteers, it's extremely questionable. And the judge basically had the same opinion. If anybody wants a copy of where the money went to, I have it all organized in an Excel spreadsheet. They can see for themselves. I'll email it off to you. And you can see who got all this money. And going forward, we have to figure out how you can get better management where I don't think it's appropriate to hand out $70,000 basically in high school scholarships. We have no high school students who are right now volunteers. Where all the money that they sent, the hundreds of thousands of dollars that went to these volunteer companies, every one of them was labeled recruitment and retention. All of the money going to the fire companies is recruitment and retention. Well, we haven't recruited anyone or retained anyone in 10 years. So, and I'd like Mr. Laurie to explain to this board why he got the $5,000 check that he wrote himself and co-signed it with David Horn. I think it's reasonable, and I'd like
One thing I want to just correct the record on, because it's important. The judge expressed no opinion on the flow of funds.
Correct.
The judge only expressed an opinion on whether or not the volunteers produced the documents that we foiled. So to suggest, which you did, that she was saying that, there was potential, any sort, it didn't happen. So let's just be clear about that.
You can get the transcript. We can give you the judge's transcript. Anybody would like a copy of the judge's transcript, we'll send it out. The judge questioned how, somebody who is their treasurer would throw away bank records and not retain them.
Again, that has to do with the FOIL and not the use of money, and you just said something different. So let's be clear, because the judge did not, in fact, she went out of her way to say that she wasn't opining.
She did not opine on how the money was spent.
Okay, so
She opined how the
that's an important an important point.
Right,
And listen, Yeah, all right.
But in any case, we need to get from these volunteer fire companies exactly how they spent this hundreds
We
of
do
thousands of dollars.
comments at the end, okay? Well, you can, Tom, you
And
can bring it
Mr.
up at
Laurie
the end,
should
Tom.
explain what he did with the $5,000. Why did he get the $5,000?
I know, but for the
You can state
second
it.
opportunity. And
Yeah, well, you'll get an opportunity to speak, I assure you.
bring it back up if you wish, it's
Anthony,
fine.
you want to say anything, or just?
Yeah, Peter,
Do you want to explain why you got the $5,000?
Okay, all right.
All right.
But as far as to come up here, Mr. Winters has come up here, told us that the volunteers haven't responded in 10 years, you said?
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Winters gave an order to the former chief, and he told him, make the volunteers stand down, okay? And the chief did do that. He did what he told him to do. And on that there, he sent a letter to the volunteers to stand down, not to respond to any calls and whatever have you. And what happened, it was never voted by the board. I asked Mr. Winters that, Mr. Winters said, go ask the chief. I got the letter, and it states, stand down, and the copy was sent, same letter was sent to the Board of Fire Commissioners, and not one commissioner voted on it. So we're standing down only because Commissioner Winters did that, and he told the former chief to do that. We sent applications to the chief's office, just my own thoughts, was Mr. Winters probably told him, put him aside. We went to the chief's office 2 to 3 times, wanting to know what happened to those applications on recruiting and retention. Nobody ever received them. We made members that are sitting here in this meeting tonight bring them there personally to the chief. Weeks went by, we never seen them. Never seen them. So we're standing down, not because the board told us to stand down, because Mr. Winters told the former chief to tell us to stand down. And, excuse me, I didn't interrupt you. I didn't interrupt you. Now, I encourage any young man out in this community to put an application in to become a volunteer. Last night I went to a fire that the captain on duty told me, I don't have enough manpower to pull hose. I was helping him pull hose. Okay? Here's where our volunteers could come in. But this commissioner and the former chief chose that just to say, we don't need the volunteers. I encourage every young man 18 years old and over, come and join the volunteers. Help your community. Get involved in your community. Someday, this will be an experience towards you becoming a paid personnel.
I will say that when I think about some of the problems we confront as a board in the district, a lot of times, you know, what comes to mind as a solution are volunteers. So I am hopeful that once this is all resolved, if it's resolved in a way that, you know, if there is any wrongdoing, those who did it are punished, but that at some point we can have, once again, an active, vibrant volunteer force. That is a hope that I have. So, and I think everyone in the community should hope for that as well.
I think,
Would agree with
I
you.
think the lawsuit brought out was an excellent win for the board, and a win that we now have transparency on money we had zero visibility on. We don't have 100% because we didn't get the volunteer companies, but we have transparency we didn't have. We have visibility we didn't have. We realize there's $6 million there, not 2. We realize how this money is being utilized, and the board can hopefully, if the idea is to go with volunteers, restructure it so it's more beneficial for the community. I mean, people are paying tax dollars. It shouldn't go to Chow's Restaurant for a handful of people. Or it shouldn't be giving out as charity. It should be used for its intended purpose. And, you know, the checks speak for themselves. If anybody wants to see the checks, they can see them, and it'll speak for yourself very clearly. So I think the board did an outstanding job following this through. And I'd like to see it continue to follow through and then figure out how to bring this to the next level. This is only a part, the visibility or transparency is only the beginning, and then figure out how to restructure this volunteer effort.
I will tell the public probably for the 100th or 1,000th time, we didn't have to go to this far. We offered Mr. Winters to come to the table 4 times to discuss it. His exact answer was, we'll take you to court. And he enjoys that. And he enjoys cutting people down. And he enjoys ridiculing people, enjoys people calling people names. This is the type of man he is. He's a very malicious man.
Yeah, and I personally ignored the 2 court orders and the contempt of court motion. Yeah, that was my doing. The volunteers ignored the contempt of court motion because of me.
If I could,
Excuse me.
If I could just,
Let's do safe
just
words.
2 things. Number one, as Commissioner Winter did mention, the printout over there that he has with him tonight is absolutely available through the laws of FOIL. In fact, I would almost compel the board to hand that over to Jamie tonight so she can put it in the office. Anybody who wants to FOIL that information, that mock-up, that FOIL should come into the office. It should not go to a commissioner and then disseminate it to the public. We have a FOIL process here in the district. It should go through our front office. Lisa, Jamie, the chief, anyone who's our FOIL officer should be answering. I know that when other people have FOILed our district, that they have received notices appropriately that say, we've received your request, and then thereafter the information is provided. If you need to pay for copies, etc., we have a process. We need to stick to that process. Number 2, echoing the comments from Peter and Commissioner Laurie, and even a bit from Dennis, I remain enthusiastic that a volunteer program here in town could be exceptionally beneficial to the district. I do think that the best way for the volunteer program to move forward is with board involvement in structuring and organization and assistance and being there to make sure that what's being done in the district is the best for the taxpayer, but also the best for the volunteers, their organization, brotherhood and sisterhood, encouraging people from all the areas of town, whether it be Tuckahoe, Eastchester, Bronxville, to come in. We have, I've mentioned this just a few minutes ago in private with Dennis, we have some interesting views that, will always kind of teeter left and right over the line, but there are a lot of ways that he and I can see eye to eye. I brought up an example of EVAC being a thriving volunteer organization here in town. There is an opportunity there for our firefighters or volunteer arm of our firefighters to thrive almost as well, maybe not in as many numbers, but as Commissioner Laurie mentioned, hose options, pulling hose, anything else that the volunteers in general are more apt to doing. The longer we wait to put a volunteer program back in action, the less volunteers are going to be there to act as on-site mentors. And our paid firemen don't have the time or the responsibility to train volunteers. But those people who have served as volunteers, they can pass that knowledge on a lot better than I could ever do it, because I haven't been one. But I would like to see everything settled appropriately, everything be put together the way it should be, and I would support a volunteer organization or organizations as they are now to thrive in the district. And I think it's valid and important, and I do agree with the chairman that it could help alleviate a lot of the fiscal hurdles that we've been trying to jump through over the last 8 months.
Thank you.
Thank you, that's it.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the last legal issue, if that's okay with everyone.
We're going good.
All right. I'd like to make the public aware of a matter the board is dealing with regarding the union. Several years ago, a prior board allowed and supported the use of fitness training equipment by firefighters in the firehouse. This included treadmills, free weights, and similar types of equipment. Over time, it has become clear that the use of such equipment can create a host of problems for the district. This spring, after careful consideration and analysis, the board instructed the chief to issue an order that all fitness equipment in our firehouses no longer be used, and any equipment that was owned by individual firefighters must be removed. There are many reasons the board directed the chief to issue this order. First, this equipment presents a greater risk of liability for the district. Other fire districts have had firefighters file 207A claims stemming from injuries resulting from the use of in-house equipment, which can cost the district millions of dollars if the injury is career-ending. Others have seen various types of negligence claims due to injury. In addition, firefighters who train heavily on the equipment during their tour of duty may not be prepared and capable of the physical demands required to perform their jobs in case of an active emergency response. I had an experience in my first week on the board with this concern. I was touring a firehouse when I observed an on-duty firefighter engaging in strenuous workouts that I felt sure would deplete their energy and readiness in an emergency situation. One firefighter in the North End house was on a treadmill reading 5 miles. He was sweating profusely, likely low on fluids, and in my opinion, less capable to perform at a fire scene than he was before he got on the treadmill. After the board's decision and the chief's directive went into effect, the board has been very disappointed in how the union has reacted on this issue. Despite the fact that the board, in an effort to continue to support physical conditioning, has offered union members reimbursement for all or a portion of their monthly gym fees should they decide to join a gym and demonstrate solid attendance, the union made outlandish claims for exorbitant gym fee reimbursement and virtually no attendance requirement. I want to be clear, we do not believe that we are obligated to pay for any of this, but the offer was made. The union has now filed a grievance with PERB over this, and both sides will incur costs to litigate the grievance. I want to be sure the public understands what is happening here. Basically, the firefighters are claiming that they have a right to work out during work hours and file line-of-duty disability claims if they get injured doing so. Because we took that privilege away, which was initially granted without asking for anything in return, we now owe them something in return for removing it. I hope that the public can see how wrong this is. If anyone wants to comment on that afterwards, Steve, well, 916 can comment when we're done. We're going to finish the meeting, and then you can speak.
Can we comment? Can board members comment?
Yes, the board can comment, yes.
Okay. I'll have a couple comments here. One, I think it's inappropriate to have a PERB or a personnel issue discussed in this matter. Usually PERB matters are discussed between our counsel and their counsel and not brought out to the public, and not, because the facts you're reading may not be the facts the union understands, and there could be a dispute over those facts. I don't think it's fair to discuss a PERB issue in public prior to its being settled. If it's settled, we can discuss the settlement. I just don't think ongoing litigation should be discussed like that. But on this issue, I'll discuss this since you went down this road. I may be responsible for a lot of this gym equipment. When I first joined the board, I thought it was a good idea to have gym equipment, and I went out and bought from NASA, who was surplusing some gym equipment, a truckload of workout equipment, and I donated it to the fire department. Those are free fixed machine weights. Now, what I know now, many years later, and court decisions later, the fixed weights are probably not a great idea. So I agree with the board, the fixed weight should probably go. But I don't think Stairmaster should go, and I don't think treadmills should go. I think we should have limits on the amount of time people spend on those two pieces of apparatus within reason, so they're not depleted after they get off the apparatus. But a Stairmaster is a vital portion of a fireman's job. They go up and down stairs all the time, and it's physical conditioning. So I'm not full agreement with the board on this whole idea. I think the fixed weights do pose a certain risk, but the Stairmasters and treadmills you can manage, and that would be my opinion on it.
Okay. Next up, discussion of firefighter interviews and hires. Last night, we interviewed 9 candidates for our 2 open probationary firefighter positions. In order to sit for the interviews, these candidates had to score 95 or higher on the written exam, as well as pass a physical aptitude test. All the candidates were excellent, and this was a truly difficult decision. The board chose 2 young men who we believe will make excellent firefighters. I am withholding the names of these candidates until the next meeting, as they must first pass physical examinations and background checks as a condition of employment. While we do not know for certain what our hiring needs will be, while this current list is valid, which we believe will be until August of 2019, I would encourage the men who did not get chosen to interview again if we have an additional need, because if we had additional spots this time, some of them would have gone to these candidates. They truly were a very talented group, and unfortunately, we could only choose two. These new hires will attend the next firefighter training class scheduled for September 17th, and hopefully come online right around the end of the year. Does anybody else want to say anything about the?
I concur. There was excellent candidates, and I wish that we were able to hire more. We had more spots open to fill, but maybe in the future that'll happen.
Yeah,
I say the same thing, that every candidate was good. The men who didn't get picked, please don't get discouraged. As Peter says, they're soon, I'm sure, everybody reaches the age of 65, they'll be retiring, and you young gentlemen will have another chance at an interview. And for the two guys that we hired, my congratulations to them.
my comment would be sometimes sitting on this board can be extremely painful, but there's nothing more painful than interviewing people for a job when you know you can only hire two and you're interviewing 8 or 9 or 10. Because you know people come there and they're putting their best foot forward, they work hard at it, they're nervous, they're doing everything they can to get that, and they're striving to get that position, and it's their dream for many of them to be in that slot, and you're only going to hire two. And last night was particularly painful because we had a very, very strong pool, and it's what I hate doing most is interviews for either promotional or for hiring, because you know last night 80% of the people you're talking to are going to be unhappy. And when in a typical hiring for a promotion, 62.5% are going to be unhappy. So it's, yeah, it's one of the, I think your board members have the same opinion. It's really a difficult thing to do.
Absolutely.
And right now, the next test is scheduled for March 2019. It's not official, but we encourage all our young men and women to take the test with their Eastchester residents.
It'll be in December, usually around the end of December is when the announcement comes out.
Okay.
Right. But even if that test takes place in March, it won't be certified until much later in the year. So the list that's out there now is going to be valid probably for a year more. Okay, next up, discussion of ethics panel. Stu, is there anything new to report on that front?
Well, I did have a conversation with the firm that we had been speaking about, taking on the opportunity to serve for the ethics panel, to be the representative for any and all legal questions that that potential panel will have. We didn't have a chance to discuss it today in executive session, so maybe that's something that we can discuss for, I guess, the September 11th meeting. But if anyone on the board needs me to re-forward them that information of the firm and the attorney that we've all agreed to move forward with, in speaking, that's fine. But I did have a very lengthy conversation with the attorney. He has exceptional experience in ethic panels for various other jurisdictions that have those kinds of instruments in place. He has indicated that he will do whatever we need to do as far as policy. If there's any future policy changes for our panel or our ethics in general, we can use him. He is aware of our regular legal representation and does not want to cross that line, but if we ever need to do anything exceptional with this panel and have him work with our representation for something that may be a hybrid, if we were to further amend our policy in the future for ethics panel specific language, they would be able to work on that together and provide us with whatever drafts we need to see in language in that respect. If the board would be so inclined, we can have that discussion and maybe put it as a full resolution for the September 11th meeting. Between now and then, I can field any questions anybody may have.
Okay, great. So we'll try to do that in time for the meeting. And if anybody has any questions, I would say maybe you can work them up, and we can
CC
try to,
everybody on the commission.
and
We'll
go
work
through
on
it.
Open together, yeah.
Okay, anyone else have any comments on that? Okay. So, I guess now we'll move to comments, first the public, then 916, and then we'll finish it with board comments. So would anyone from the public like to speak? Sure.
Okay, thank you. Sure.
Okay. Thank you for allowing me to address you this evening. I am the manager of the Bronxville Cemetery, which is a neighbor to the Bronxville Firehouse at 20 Midland Avenue, Bronxville, New York. For your information, the cemetery is owned by the Ridgefield Park Reformed Presbyterian Church in Ridgefield Park, New Jersey. The cemetery was located in Bronxville in 1852 when the church was in Manhattan. The cemetery is governed by a committee of the church along with its deacons and elders. This communication is a follow-up to 2 letters that I have addressed to the fire chiefs in the last 5 years. The first to Chief Grogan, dated April 3rd, 2013. Did not receive a response to that letter. The second to Chief Tween, dated May 22nd, 2018, and we subsequently had a very pleasant visit with him when he came to look at the wall situation, which is what this is about. The reason that I'm addressing this meeting is that during the recent snowstorms of this past winter, our snowplow man did damage to the wall that directly abuts the property of the Bronxville Firehouse. I have brought photographs of the wall for your reference, and I'll pass these around in a little bit. I do want to make reference to them, but I brought you 2 photographs so you can see the situation. It is our understanding that the wall belongs to the fire district and was constructed in its present form in 1947-48 when the firehouse was built. In the early 1970s, I distinctly remember that the fire district sent a stonemason to repair the wall on both sides. We would like to confer with you concerning appropriate repairs to the damaged wall and how that should be done. However, the wall that continues up parallel to the driveway in the direction of the cemetery is beginning to need some attention from normal aging. The wall wraps around towards the Bronxville Village Hall and forms a border with the Bronxville Department of Public Works. And some of you are familiar with the parking lot behind the Bronxville Firehouse. You'll see it's the same wall that wraps around, it is a uniform wall. There seem to be 3 parts to this project. Part 1, repair of the damage done by the snowplow, which is the responsibility of the cemetery or the snowplow man. Part 2, repair a further long-term deterioration along the length of the wall that adjoins the driveway and the lane of the cemetery. And that goes further up around to the parking lot area behind the Bronxville Firehouse. Part 3, repavement of the entire driveway that leads from Midland Avenue to the rear entrance of the cemetery on Palumbo Place. That project would include the section of the driveway that directly abuts the wall of the Bronxville Firehouse and is directly next to the residence of the manager, which is me, which is where I live. In the last month, we have discerned that there has been erosion of sand from under the pavement of the driveway next to the house, and this just became apparent to me as we looked at the situation just in the last month. Regardless of the larger repavement project, we will need to address this problem as soon as possible. The repavement of the driveway, of course, is the responsibility of the cemetery and the church. In speaking with Chief Tween about this matter, there has been some question raised about who precisely owns the wall. He has shown me, and I have confirmed at Village Hall, that a survey dated October 2nd, 1944, indicates that the 1944 wall closer to Midland Avenue is on the property of the firehouse, while the section of the 1944 wall that is just beyond the manager's residence is partly on the fire district property and partly on the cemetery property. And I will show you that survey as well. However, the current wall seems to have been developed in 1947-48 when the Bronxville Firehouse was built. I have visited the Bronxville Buildings Department upstairs and looked through the file on the Bronxville Firehouse property, which is Lot 6G 321A. There are indeed records that go back to the planning of the building of the firehouse around 1943 to 48. There is a letter from Hawkins, Delafield, and Longfellow, which seems to be an attorney or a survey company, dated May 25, 1945, that indicates there is some ambiguity concerning the line. I direct your attention to a copy of the letter that is in the Bronxville Building Department files. And that's the last page of what I've given you. You'll note it's dated May 25, 1945, and you can read it later. But I do want to draw your attention to the second part of that first paragraph. I understand, and this is somebody speaking in 1945, I understand that discussions have been had with the village officials and the fire district with respect to the purchase by the fire district of an additional frontage of 10 foot on Poplar Street, making the total frontage 170 feet. Poplar Street is now Palumbo Place. On this survey, a dotted line at a point 160 feet from Midland Avenue gives the course and distance between Poplar Street and the lands of the Presbyterian Church Cemetery, which is us. In view of the proposal of the fire district to purchase an additional 10 feet, it is necessary to have a description of the enlarged plot. It seems to me that it is advisable to know both from a standpoint of the property conveyed to the fire district and the property retained by the village, the distance between Poplar Street and the lands of the Presbyterian Church Cemetery at about 170 feet from Midland Avenue. The line of division should run the same course as it does at the 160-foot mark. We should likewise know the distance from the new line to Midland Avenue along the lands of the Presbyterian Church Cemetery. This will probably be more than 10 feet for the reason that the line of the property in the rear runs at a different angle than the line of the property on Poplar Street. No survey seems to exist after October 2nd, 1944, which would, of course, include the dates of existence of the current Bronxville Firehouse to the present time. The cemetery has 2 surveys from 1917 and 1923. I would therefore propose that a survey be made of the Bronxville Firehouse property to determine where the property line falls so that we can fairly resolve this matter. Thank you for your consideration. I look forward to working with the fire district as we seek to serve the community. We do appreciate the work that you and the fire district do here in Eastchester, Tuckahoe, and Bronxville. And we have always appreciated the firemen of the Bronxville Firehouse as our neighbors. So that is why I'm here. I will pass the survey out and the papers for your consideration.
Now, I think they probably moved the cemetery from New York City in 1852 because they weren't allowed to bury people in New York City for a period of time during different outbreaks. And that's why they stopped burying people in New York City and moved everybody and started using Brooklyn and Long Island City because you weren't allowed to bury in Manhattan.
New Jersey and out here, the railroad line had just been put through.
Right.
1847, there was a Cemetery Ruralification Act or something like that. And because of that, a lot of cemeteries were moved out of
New York City. It was typhoid, I think they were worried about, and, yeah.
I have a question. You mentioned in your letter that you had sent an initial notice to Chief Grogan in 2013. Did you ever follow up with that, the written letter?
I did not follow up with that. I do this part-time, so I teach in a college, and it was not about this damage, the large damage. There was a little bit of damage at the bottom, and I think that's, well, you can see that at the very bottom, near Midland Avenue. And I said, well, you know, we ought to resolve this, and I never did hear back.
You wouldn't happen to have a copy of that letter, would you?
I do have a copy of that letter.
Could you send that to us?
Yes, I am
I'd
certainly
be interested in
send
seeing
that
it.
to you.
Just send the commissioners at Eastchester FD, it's right on our website.
Commissioners, plural, and I'll send 5 copies.
Yeah, or send it to Chief Tween like you did anything else, it's fine. I think
Here's-
I believe I sent Chief Tween a letter.
Okay.
Okay.
You sent him a letter, the 2013 copy?
A copy of the 2013
Oh, okay.
copy. And I will certainly send a copy of that letter.
Great, love to see
That
it.
was much less damage. That was just talking about general maintenance. We realize that there's been damage done in the last 6 months or so.
A couple of things I would say about this, that from my own analysis, I actually went over and spent a fair amount of time at the site. The wall needs maintenance, and if it is in fact on our property and our responsibility, we will maintain what needs to be maintained. However, most of the damage on that wall is the result of the plowing that was done on the driveway leading up to the cemetery. You know, there are sections where the plow literally took the top of the wall and pushed it off. And quite frankly, I'm not sure why the fire district would pay for those repairs. I think we should be going after the plow company. I also think that some of that damage, even if the plow didn't hit the wall directly, the fact that they were plowing the snow into the wall caused further damage. As far as the contention about, issues with the wall and the sand, the wall, from what I could tell, was properly constructed in that it has weep holes at the bottom, and they're intentionally there so that water doesn't build up behind the wall, and then when you have freezing conditions, create pressure which pushes the wall over. So it's a good thing that those are there. My feeling is, though, is that the sand that's there has more to do with the construction of the driveway on the other side. That driveway was built up, the grade was taken higher and brought up against the wall. And typically when you do construction like that, you're supposed to use larger bank-run gravel, stone against the wall, not sand. And if you do have sand, usually you put fabric. Now, I know this is a long time ago and things have changed, but I've actually built walls like this myself, and that prevents the sand from eroding. So I think part of it is the construction that took place on the driveway itself, and it's exacerbated by the fact that there's leaders coming off of the home that are directing the water right into the wall. So I'm happy to explore the ownership, and if we need to do a new survey to find out what it is, and like I said, if this is our wall, I think the district is, responsible to maintain it, and I'll certainly, advocate to the board that we should do so. But the majority of what I've seen is an issue that I believe the cemetery should be dealing with. And so, I think that's the place to start.
But I just respond to two things. You have 2 points. One is the construction of the wall and the driveway and so forth. And I wasn't born in 1947, 48, and I wasn't born in earlier years when the house was constructed in 1899. So we'll have to explore that. And I'm not exactly sure how best to do that, whether you need a civil engineer to look, we need to get a civil engineer to look at that. The second thing was about the water and the pipe, the drain pipe from the leaders and gutters. We've had a lot of rain in the last 3 weeks, as we well know. So I went out there in the last 2 weeks for just to watch where the water was flowing. And there is 2 streams that go down. They don't go towards the wall. They really go directly down the driveway. And I can take a video of that if on another rainy day. It sounds like we're going to have more thunderstorms in the future, and I can show that. So.
Okay. I guess the thing to do is to figure out, we've explored for surveys. If we found, in fact, we think that the 1940 survey is the most recent?
The 1944 one that I provided is the only one that I've seen that's more recent than his. He had the 19-teens, and 1920s, 28, 23.
Okay.
So.
And can I ask you, what is your plow guy said about repairing the damage that he's caused?
I have to talk to him about that. He has a larger plow now than he had, because I can sense that as he was plowing. It was a heavier plow.
Okay. Here's the thing. I'm looking at these pictures, and I agree that there's work to be done here, but the first thing to do is to make these repairs so that this doesn't get any worse, because when part of the top of the wall is pushed up, rain is now getting directly into the wall. So I really think that we're going to work to try to resolve the survey issue, and I assure you we'll do that. But I really think that what we should be doing right away is, holding the plow guy responsible for the damage that he caused and making sure that he gets a qualified person in there to do the repairs. And then we can, investigate, the weep holes and the construction and stuff like that. But I think I look at these pictures and my sense is what I described is what's going on there. And that there's, this was a matter of the type of fill they used to raise the grade on the driveway as it goes up behind the building. And so,
we did not feel it was right to do anything because it's not our property and we don't feel that we have but I will call our plowman.
oh, if we, listen, we want to make sure that it's a reputable, insured contractor that does the work, but beyond that, we'll certainly grant permission for access, and we don't have a problem with that, right?
Just to add to that, it probably would be good in the future.
But even if we have a survey
To
done, I'm
invest in
fine
a
with
couple of
that.
dozen
Get a survey.
reflective,
But these guys-
small, like
I'll
thin
fix it.
poles,
You
put them
over.
down the wall for the winter months when the snow does fill up, so that if the snow gets as high as the wall, or he needs to see the distance, he can see that. I know a lot of families in the town do that because of plowing the streets with the stones along your property. You'll see large garbage trucks that are used as plows during the winter to kind of hit the stones that people have along their streets, especially in Bronxville Manor where I grew up. A lot of people have those poles because their curbs would get cut, the ends of their driveways or their walkways would get cut because the snow would pile up over the end of the property and you wouldn't quite see as the plow came through that they were either on your property, close to it, or so far away that, so maybe that would be,
So-
a couple of stakes down there to kind of, yeah.
Because right now, it is paved all the way up to the wall. It's with asphalt.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would ask that you get in touch with the contractor, let him know that you believe he's responsible for repairing the damage. And in the meantime, the board will confer, and like I said, we're going to do the right thing, but, we don't want to be paying for damage that somebody else caused. So,
You said you want him licensed and insured. Those are the two requirements?
yes. And capable of doing the work. So, somebody who's performed that kind of work before.
He should report to the chief.
Chief Tween would be the person yeah.
This will be the person who,
Yes.
thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Are we going to do anything with a survey or not at this time?
We're going to discuss it, and we're going to get back to you.
Yep.
Tom?
It's pretty straightforward, though. You got 10 inches, 6 inches. You take electronic meter and nail it in 2 seconds.
Thank you, Commissioner. My comment is pertaining to the alleged $5,000 check that Commissioner Laurie wrote to himself. The fact is that Commissioner Laurie did not write the check to himself. Commissioner Laurie, at the time the check was issued, was president of the VOA. He had to sign the check along with the secretary. That's why his name is on that check. Just to go, wait a second. Just to go back, the night in question, Commissioner Laurie had made his intentions known that he was running for the Board of Fire Commissioners. It was at that meeting, and it was a motion made by Vincent Spadaro, seconded by Fred Gruber, to issue a check for his campaign fund.
Oh, okay.
That's what the check was for.
So-
At the next meeting in December, Commissioner-elect Laurie resigned the position, and that was it. But he was one of 2 people that were supposed to sign that check. And that motion and second was unanimous. It was 14-0 at that meeting that check was issued.
Okay, so you're saying, just so I get this straight, I just want to get it clear. The VOA gave Mr. Laurie, we forget who authorized it, a $5,000 check so he could run for fire commissioner.
For his committee.
From the committee. And,
For his committee to elect him.
wait a second. I can just come back up to the mic so I don't want to get this wrong. I would prefer to get it correct. So, Mr. Laurie decided he wanted to run for fire commissioner.
Correct.
And so he went to the VOA and said, hey, I'm
He
running.
didn't go to the VOA. He was already at the VOA.
He was at the VOA, he was president of the VOA at the time.
Exactly.
And he says, I'm president of the VOA, I'd like to run for fire commissioner.
No, he just said that he put his papers in to run for fire commissioner. That was it.
And then, so you guys
No,
decided it would be...
that was it.
Okay.
And the rest of the members one of the members made a motion, it was seconded, and everybody in the room voted in favor of cutting Mr. Laurie a check for his campaign for fire commissioner.
And so the Volunteer Benevolent Association used the 2% money.
No.
No,
But all your money comes from the benevolent.
and there you go. The
The
2%
VOA.
money,
Right.
right, exactly.
The VOA
2%.
cut a check to Mr. Laurie for
Yes.
$5,000 so he could run. Did you
Yes.
give $5,000 to the man who ran against him?
How much did you give him?
Well, I write checks all the time, but it's not
Okay, how much
personal
did you
money.
give the man to run against me?
Nothing,
Nothing?
nothing. I didn't fund anything to him.
No.
But I write checks for, I mean, I try, usually when somebody's running, I usually say, okay, I'll do a mailing, I'll do this and that, and I spend money. It's my money. It's not taxpayer money. It's
This
Dennis
wasn't
Winter's
taxpayer
money.
money.
And if I spend money on campaigns, it's my money. I can do what I want with it.
And this wasn't 2% money. This wasn't taxpayer money.
It had to be taxpayer money. It was in the VOA. The VOA is taxpayer money.
My lips, it was not 2% money that gave him the $5,000.
We accept it's not 2% money, but the one distinction, Dennis, I'm not sure I'm getting is, there's an issue of where the funds came from, personal or taxpayer, but I also don't understand, like, you're suggesting there's a conflict by them even giving money to a specific,
They can't. They
but
can't.
yet you have endorsed and paid for other candidates,
Yep.
but not their opponents.
No, but you
Why
can't-
was that not an ethical dilemma?
You can't give, like, they give money to the Democratic Party in Tuckahoe. They can't do that. They can't give money to charity. They're a government entity. Well, yeah, then who got the check for $500 to the Democratic Party in Tuckahoe? I'll give you the check number.
No, but Dennis, my question is, do you think it's ethical for a commissioner on this board, the chairman of the board, to spend money to support a specific candidate and not candidates in general, which is what you were suggesting?
My own
that-
private money. I can spend my own private money and do
But,
what I
but,
want
but
with
forget,
it.
so let's just say there was, one member of the, all right, I hear what.
You can't have-
Without
Mr.
knowing, I hear what you said, but without knowing,
What's there to know? He just told you. He just told you the benevolent, the volunteer fire company wrote up
the benevolent.
the volunteer, the money washes.
VOA, he said.
Okay, the VOA. The VOA, which you wrote at the VOA, which is a composite of the volunteer fire companies, wrote a check for $5,000 to a guy who wants to run for fire commissioner.
And you were telling people I wrote it to myself.
You did write it to yourself.
No, I did not.
He didn't write it to
Lori.
himself. He
The
had
check-
he had to sign it because he was in the position of president of the VOA at the time.
Excuse me, his signature's on the bottom of the check and it's written for
That he
him.
just
And
explained
so
it
is
to you.
Dave Horns.
David
And had
Horn's
he not been the
signature-
president, his name wouldn't have been on the check. We'd have still gave it to him. Because he was president, he has the right to sign that check,
But you guys
whether
live
it's
in
to
a
him or
floodplain.
not. And the one for the Tuckahoe Democratic Committee, that's when a candidate, Anthony Fiore of Tuckahoe, was running for the Board of Trustee in the village of Tuckahoe. We supported his campaign for that position as well.
And you wrote him a check. This is the money for
Wrote him
the,
a check.
this is the money for the volunteer fire company you're writing for political candidates.
He
And
was,
this-
We're writing to support a volunteer firefighter.
thank you, Tommy.
You guys can go into your pocket, you could go into your own personal pocket and write a check for Mr. Laurie. You certainly cannot go in to public funds and write a check for Mr. Laurie. You cannot write sure it is. Of course it is.
It's not.
What,
Do you have another?
track the money. Where do you
source
think
of
it came
income?
from?
Do we have a source of income?
Yeah, it's called the benevolent. That's what it's
No,
called.
no, but he's saying it's not, so let him tell us the source of income that it came from. That's
When I
fine.
joined the Eastchester Fire, Union Corners Engine and Hose Company, number 4, in 1979, when I joined that company, my first night in, I paid an initiation fee. Every year, I paid annual dues. You missed the drill, you got a fine. You missed the parade, you got a fine. That's where the money comes. You miss a meeting, you got a fine. This is where the majority of the money we have now comes from things like that we've been doing since the beginning of this fire district.
No, it does not.
Mr. Vishy, do you have records of that income? You know, do you collect those records and deposits and stuff? Is there a running, I mean, that sounds like a viable source of income to me, but I would like to see it backed up by
Absolutely.
paperwork. So
I
that would be
haven't-
good.
Those go back 100 years. I don't know where all those records are.
Well, I understand that, but, you know, within reason.
2014, let's get to exact, let's not go beat around the bush. 2014, check number 1055, on January 23rd, 2014, $59,000 was given to the VOA from the benevolent. Where do you think the VOA got its money from? $59,000 from the benevolent into the VOA
As a
in
newsflash.
January 2014.
There's a newsflash. It didn't come from the 2% money.
Okay. Okay.
All right, we're not going to be able to prove or disprove some of the things that are saying. Everybody's made their piece and their statements on what they believe, and I think we leave it there. All right, anyone else from the public? All right, 916.
Commissioner, you just read a little statement to put yourself in excellent light, but it's totally false what you read. If your only condition was you were paying for our gym memberships, I'll accept that right now. But we both know that wasn't the only condition. There were many other conditions in your offer to us to settle this matter. You got to us, we gave a counteroffer. We have to file with PERB to preserve our rights to PERB. We're time constrained, where if we don't file with a certain amount of time, we lose the ability to go to PERB. So we just did that so we wouldn't lose that right. I contacted you after PERB was contacted and said, we have a PERB day coming up. How come I haven't heard from you? How come we can't resolve this? You rescinded your offer. Anytime you want to man up and resolve this matter, we can. Or else we'll go down to Brooklyn, and you could waste taxpayers' money like we're all trying to avoid. Anytime, this could be resolved in 15 minutes. Don't take your ball and go home.
All right, here's the thing, Steve, I'm not the only one who's had this experience, but before that agreement was sent to you, it was telegraphed what was going to be in it, in detail. And you personally assured me, first you assured me before we even got to this point, that there would be no IP charge, no grievance filed on this matter at all. I remember you saying specifically, it's the department's decision on gym equipment. But anyway, but then we talked about the agreement more specifically, and I made clear to you the most important details of the agreement that we were sending. And they were what the reimbursement amount would be, and it would be enough to cover a full membership at an economy gym like a Planet Fitness and partial towards a more upscale gym. It would require you guys to sign away 207A line of duty injury claims if you got injured using that membership, and that you would have to actually prove, if we reimbursed you, that you attended the gym on a somewhat regular basis that was very light. All those things were told to you, and you told me you agreed. You said, that's workable. Then I go back to this board and I say, guys, here's the thing. We don't have to give them anything. I think we're going to win this in PERB. But I want to extend an olive branch. I want to make this better. Let's do this. And I get these guys to agree to it. And then I send it to you, and you basically cross off all those things. You make demands that are so egregious, so outrageous, that it was a complete waste of time. And I've said this to other people, and I've heard that similar commissioners have had a similar experience. So listen, I want to negotiate. I honestly do, Steve. I want things to work out, okay? I wanted you guys to have something in return for taking this, even though we didn't need to do it. But if you make demands that are so outrageous, then what are we going to, I'm going to take my ball and go home. I'm not going to waste my time. And that's how that worked. So if you're saying that anything I said is untrue, well, guess what? You're misremembering or you're misrepresenting.
We didn't discuss how many times someone would have to go to the club within a month. As you know, you don't get 207A for getting hurt in the gym, and the state decides whether you get 207A, not the union, not you. So there were terms in there that we did cross out, that we thought there was movement on. You decide not to move on anything. We never discussed 10 times a month to go to the gym. I go to the gym all the time. I sometimes don't make 10 times a month.
You think we should be paying money for someone who doesn't use a gym? You think the
No, I didn't say that.
Our taxpayers?
I didn't say that. But
But
there's a
that's-
number we could. But there's a number we could work out. You wanted to stick to your numbers, and that was it. And I told you, this is negotiations. It's not cheerleading.
Steve, The numbers were generous to begin with. Asking somebody who's getting their gym membership paid for or contribution towards it to actually attend 10 times a month is reasonable. Like,
anyone who
all
goes
right,
to a
yeah,
gym-
maybe the number should be 2. Let's negotiate that. We'll give you money to go to a gym 2 times a month. That's crazy. It's crazy.
I don't know how many commissioners belong to gyms, but do they go 120 times a year? Or do they average 10 times a month?
I go 120 times a year.
Steve,
That's what I'm
here's
saying. I mean,
here's the thing.
there is a number, and that's why I said it's called negotiations.
Steve, I don't have my keychain here, but guess what? My gym is Planet Fitness, okay? It's not too lowbrow for me. I'm happy to go there. It's a good gym. We offered you guys, an amount that would have covered a full membership there, and you kind of thumbed your nose at it, and you said, oh, it's, no way, we want more money than that. And then guess what? We want to go, we don't want to go 10 times. Give us $50 a month, to 45 or whatever it was, and then tell us we only have to go 3 times a month. We're not going to do that. We're not going to. Steve, if you want to negotiate, let me just give you, some advice. If you want to negotiate, don't come up with something that's so pie in the sky that you basically alienate the party you're trying to negotiate with. Negotiate in good faith.
I'm in court every day, negotiate every week. You don't have to tell me how to negotiate. I know how to negotiate. Okay? It's called negotiations. You made your outlandish offer, we counter-propose. You go back and forth till we agree.
Steve,
Same thing with contract negotiations.
what you're saying is not true. I telegraphed, I told you everything that was going to be in that agreement. I told you.
There are things in that agreement that were never discussed. All right. I thought we'd go back and forth. Okay. We'll solve it in Brooklyn. It's okay.
That's right.
Not a nice place to be out there.
All right, board comments.
I got a couple. I just want to let the board know that our chaplain, Father Paul, was transferred to the Bronx. I spoke to the pastor, and he says late September, early October, he'll be getting a new assistant, and that he'll let us know that if he's willing to be our chaplain.
Okay.
Okay, and I spoke to Mrs. Spadaro. She spoke to the funeral parlor. They're going to notify me anytime after October 8th when the little tree is coming so we could plant it at the monument on Post Road in John Albany's place. And we have a ceremony for unveiling that on May of 2019. And Chief has already had the design. He showed it to me of the plaque from Mr. Spadaro. I agreed to it. Chief did a good job on it. Now it's just up to the chief to put the order in. We had some funds. It's not costing anybody any money, no organization any money. It's all the money that was donated through people who heard when Mr. Spadaro passed away that they sent contributions to the fire department, and that's where the money's coming from. It's not disturbing anybody's organization or the department.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else on the board want to?
Yeah, the only other comment I have is more on the fire department stuff. Last night there was a serious fire in Bronxville. The home health care aide probably saved a woman's life, but one thing people should remember is, and I have the same problem myself all the time, is the smoke detectors mostly have a 10-year battery life. All the new ones that you bought in the smoke detector itself only lasts 10 years if you look at them. So check your smoke detectors. Time goes by so fast. And I know myself lately, I've been swapping out smoke detectors because 10 years went by already. So, and if anybody needs help checking their smoke detectors, if you're in Midland Gardens or anything, or any apartment building, the fire department will come by and help you if you need a hand. So, a fire like last night reminds people how quick smoke can move through a building.
Okay, I have a few comments unless anybody else wants to say anything. Okay. At our meeting last month, we had a discussion about the high incidence of sick rates and the possibility that it may lead to the temporary closure of a firehouse if it could be done safely. So for budgetary reasons, we couldn't continue to fund the overtime budget forever. So a comment was made by the union leadership that I'd like to address now. And that comment was that if we would close firehouses, the closure should be rotated among all firehouses to spread the risk. Just to be clear, as I mentioned last week, any decision to temporarily close a house would only occur after careful consideration and belief that it could be done without meaningfully increasing the risk to the community. Any decision on which house may be temporarily closed will be made by the chief after careful consideration of what is best for the district as a whole, not based on a rotation, which quite simply would be a flawed approach. Again, I will state that this is not something the board wants to see happen, but the cost of excessive sick rates is unsustainable. Okay, also, two other comments from last month's meeting that I want to address. Both the union leadership and Chief Tween had made some comments about new construction that has occurred in the community over the last several years. And the chief mentioned a 20-year-old study that was done in the late 90s that recommended a certain level of staffing. I just want to reiterate and be very clear about this. The Eastchester Fire District has no minimum manning, okay? We can staff as we believe appropriate. While we would certainly consider the results and recommendations of a recent study conducted by a reputable firm on staffing, I do not believe that a 20-year-old study is relevant at this point. First off, new construction cited last week is sprinklered. In fact, all codes have changed dramatically over the last 20-plus years, which significantly reduced the risk of fire. I just personally managed the renovation of the co-op where I live and worked with our fire prevention unit to make sure that all the materials used, carpets, wallpaper, met up-to-date flame spread requirements. We also installed new state-of-the-art fire alarm systems with central monitoring and fire location pinpointing. Automatic alarm prevalence, building codes, the number of people who smoke have all changed dramatically in the last 20 years. Further, the mutual aid system whereby neighboring fire departments assist us in emergency situations has been perfected over the last 20 years. For many Eastchester residents, the closest firehouse is not even one that's within the Eastchester Fire District. The history and experience of different departments doing things differently has been well documented and may provide a basis for different conclusions that were reached in the 90s. This is a complex issue, but I don't believe the 20-year-old report is still relevant, and I would not give it much weight. To be clear, and this is important, I'm not saying that a new study would not support our existing staffing levels or recommend that we should be staffed with more people or less. But what I am saying is it's time for a new study because something that was done 20 years ago is no longer relevant.
I disagree with you on the fact that every Eastchester resident, the closest firehouse that they're going to get responded to will be an Eastchester firehouse. You will not get Yonkers responding to us, even though they have a closer house that maybe they will not respond from that house for a mutual aid call. They'll bring firemen in from other houses. So while there may be a physical house closer to us, Yonkers Mutual Aid Company will not be the company coming from that house. So every Eastchester resident, if they have a fire, will see an Eastchester fire truck first before they see a neighboring company. I don't think there's any case they won't.
God bless you.
And I think the fire last night, for anyone who has any doubt, the fire codes definitely have improved. You're correct, 100% on that. But not all buildings are current fire code under today's build. So Midland Gardens wasn't built last week. It was built sometime around 1942, I think. So it's going to live by those codes. And many of the structures in Tuckahoe, Garth Road in particular, are old construction, old code, and so they're not up-to-date code. So you have to gear your fire department for the buildings, your lowest common denominator, I'll call it, not your more advanced buildings. So while correct, we moved $50,000 tonight to cover the overtime till our next meeting, so there's no risk of closing a house by then. But as we move forward, it's highly unlikely I'll vote to shut down a firehouse or not move money.
Okay?
I would say, too, I would concur with you. We had this conversation, I think, during public session in January or February of 17, discussing the need for a new plan to be done, a survey, if you will, of our district, the construction, the man and woman power that we have here. And I would definitely support us updating that with a new study and just make sure, at least we know potentially will have some parameters. I don't think that we should change the minimum manning or the lack thereof, but I think that we should definitely have an updated report on what we're dealing with. And I understand what you're saying. I think Peter was more posing his comments towards the new construction being so much far along in its technology versus like Midland Gardens. I think we all know that, updated smoke alarms and CO2 detectors, you can only do so much in old construction to do that. I live in a building that's old construction, and I have some hardwired smoke alarms, but, that's about as much as I can do. There's no technologically advanced, pinpointing of where the fire is. It's probably just going to be the smoke or flames. It's going to tell you it's in my apartment, whereas maybe Peter's, it'll send everyone an email that, he's burning brownies.
Midland Garden is hardwired. It's a hardwired building.
Again, I'm not saying that our current level of staffing is absolutely appropriate, or it's too low, or it's too high. What I am saying, though, is so much has changed over the last 20 years, and of course, I agree with Dennis 100%, that, you have to be prepared for what we have, and there's a lot of buildings that aren't, up to what today's code is, and so I certainly, want to make sure that we're capable of handling any situation that we're confronted with. But again, I just think that any reference to a study, given the changes that have taken place 20 years ago, it's like if we want to do audiovisual here and somebody brought out a report on VHS and said, hey, we'd say we want a new report. So, and I think we should get a new report. That's my point.
And I think the public needs to be aware too that our firefighters don't just respond to fire, as I know personally this week when they responded to gas in my apartment. So it's not just about fighting fires too, as far as making sure that we have the right amount of people and we're able to cover shifts, and like going to what Dennis was saying about moving money for overtime, that's all coming into the same conversation. Our firefighters are not just paid to answer a call about fire. They're EMTs, they're answering medicals, they're answering alarms, they're answering just about anything. So I agree with both of you.
Okay, with that, I would make a motion to adjourn.
Yes.
Second.
Okay. Commissioner Raven.
Aye.
Commissioner Laurie.
Aye.
Commissioner, I'm an aye. Commissioner Winter.
Aye.
Commissioner Roach.
Aye.
Motion carries, meeting's adjourned.
9:20, is that what it is?